All right, so the epoxy's been poured. It is full coverage over top the entire slab. That's the way I like to do it on big pours. Everybody has a personal preference, but as you notice, even though we let the epoxy settle, there are still bubbles everywhere. So everybody has the method that they like to use. Some people use heat guns. I prefer the propane torch because I like using torches. So we're gonna go ahead and pop these bubbles. One thing that you're going to want to watch out for is any what I would call bleeders, where you have continuous bubbling coming out from a corner or from underneath of the slab if it's not fully clamped down. As you see, I do have it clamped down with blocks that are wrapped in the tape, so they're easy to remove. But you want to watch for those bleeders because you're going to have to babysit those so you don't get big potholes, as I call it, in the epoxy. You are going to have some micro bubbling along the edges. One thing to note that I hadn't said earlier was that the wood itself, do not seal the wood. Don't put any type of a sealant onto the wood. Some people put polyurethane. That's been found to cause problems with adhesion. So don't seal the wood. Oils, polys, anything like that is going to cause problems with the epoxy and the adhesion to the wood. It's going to pop, it's going to crack, it's going to let go, and you're going to have problems down the road. So make sure that the wood is raw. You are going to get some micro bubbling. That's totally normal as long as you watch this and you're popping the bubbles as they come up. You do have 3 total days before this cures, 72 hours. 72-hour cure time. You can come back in 24 hours and still be able to pop the bubbles. It's going to be kind of a taffy consistency at 24 hours, but you'll still be able to pop the bubbles and it'll reset itself. Once you get to day 2, 48 hours, no more bubble popping is going to be possible. So what it is at that point is where it is, and you're going to have to sand out any bubbles that have persisted. And if you look here, over here on this line, and right in here, you see I got a couple little bleeders. Most of those bubbles are gone, but I got a bleeder there, I got a bleeder there, and a couple over here in the center. So we're going to want to watch those. If we don't continually pop those, we're going to get big bubble clusters that could cause problems with the final finish. But I do put extra epoxy in, and that's to prevent having what I call potholes, where you get bubbles that sink below the depth, the final depth of the piece. So we're going to watch that for a little bit and see how this kind of sets out. Once the epoxy is poured, then the waiting starts. The timeline for the epoxy to cure and for all the bubbles to work their way out is hours upon hours. So while we're sitting here watching this and babysitting this piece, let's talk about some of the things that we haven't touched base on yet, or common questions that I get. You know, a pretty normal question I get is what is the point of the blocks here? The blocks are here for a couple of reasons. Number one, to keep the wood from floating up out of the epoxy. Okay, so the epoxy, it is pretty thin like water, so the wood will float up. It's buoyant, so you got to use the blocks to keep it pushed down so you don't have all the epoxy work underneath. You are going to have some of the epoxy work underneath the piece and work underneath the blocks. So, you know, one of the things that you have to do is to pop the blocks out when it finally does cure. A couple things that I've learned from doing this is it is a learning process. Number one thing to remember is that you are human. You are going to make mistakes. I've made lots of mistakes. I've unfortunately had, silicone seals break where I have, $1,000 of epoxy on the floor and there's no way you can stop it. Be prepared for things like that to happen. This is, it is a challenge, but it's a rewarding challenge. If you do everything right to be able to have a piece that looks so great. But be prepared, make sure that you're following all the steps, but also don't be surprised if something does happen. All right, so we've waited a while. We've had some bubbles pop out. We're going to go ahead and torch those again. Like I said, you can use a heat gun as well. You don't want to hit directly with the torch. You don't want to cook the epoxy. You're just, you know, giving a little rise in temperature to make those bubbles work their way out. And that's the whole point of this. That's why a heat gun works too. But don't sit in one spot too long, or you're going to create a chain reaction with the epoxy starting to dry faster than it should. Now, this does have 3 days to cure, so I've prepared a piece already. We've already taken it out of the casing, and I've sanded it down, and we're going to show you how to apply finish to that and what the final product looks like after it's been dried and ready to go. All right, so I've shown you how to make your mold, how to prep it, how to prep the wood for the pour, all the mixing, the color, everything that's so fun about the front side of doing epoxy. Now let's talk about the great stuff that happens at the end. Once your epoxy's cured for at least 3 days, sometimes 4, make sure it's 70 degrees in the room that it's in. Once that's cured, you're ready to pop it out of the form, and then you start the sanding. You take the extra epoxy off. I have a charcuterie board here that is almost ready for the oil. Make sure if you're doing a charcuterie board, you're using a food grade oil. If you're doing other stuff, there's lots of different products. Make sure you're not using polyurethane. Epoxy and polyurethane do not mix well. So you're using oils, waxes, something that is approved for epoxy. But what we're going to do here is I have started standing this with 100 grit. I've worked my way up. About to do 1,000 grit with my Festool orbital. These give a real nice, this is a number 3. This is number 3 orbital. I start with a number 5 orbital, work my way up as the grit climbs. This gives me a nice, easy sanding, even. And we're going to take this to 1,000 and then put on the oil. Another thing that's great about the Festool system is the dust collection system. It really sucks almost everything up. You sometimes have a little bit left in there that you got to get with a tack cloth, but for the most part, as you're sanding, it's pulling most of the dust out of there, so you don't have to get too crazy cleaning this. Make sure that when you do clean it, you're not using an alcohol-based cleaner, because that will break down the epoxy. So I have a food safe cutting board oil here. I'm going to go ahead and put that on. I like to hand apply it. It looks really nice. It's fun to do. And make sure you follow the instructions for whatever product you use. This one says shake well. We're going to shake it up. Make sure you put enough on there to really get it. And you see the colors really pop on that epoxy. It's, you know, it starts out kind of a hazy white because of the sanding process, but as you put on the oil, boy, does it come alive. All right, everybody, I'm wrapping up this Ecopoxy Flowcast pour. Really loving how the colors turned out with the midnight blue and the whale and the depth that it's given it. I hope somebody out there was using this as a way to figure out how to do the pour, and I hope the pour turned out great. A couple things that I want to throw out there is everything that I use here today, from the Ecopoxy Flowcast to the wood, the melamine board that I used for the form, everything is available here at Hartville Hardware. They have a great product selection depending on the level of pour you want to do, from a small pour to a big pour to the finishing products, whatever you may need, including the tools. All the Festool tools that I use, I get right here at Hartville Hardware. They have all sorts of selections. So I really hope that you had a great pour. I hope that I was able to answer some questions for you. If you have some questions that I didn't answer, go ahead and comment below. Somebody from Hartville or myself will answer. We'll try and do the best we can to help you through the process. And good luck out there, and God bless.